Hello, everyone, and welcome to this in the first of hopefully many upcoming Quincy House lectures here in Washington. Today, we are pleased to welcome Father Francline. He is a priest of the Diocese of Kumbu in Cameroon, and he is currently a doctoral candidate at Catholic University of America, just up the street. Thank you all for coming, and let's put our hands together for Father Francline.
My dear friends, let me begin by saying how pleased I am to be here tonight with you and to share with you very briefly a number of concerns about what is very unknown to you, the situation in the Cameroons. I'm going to begin by giving a brief history of what happened, and then I will let you know exactly where we are. And that's my country. That's where I come from. This is in West Africa or in Central Africa. And it's very unfortunate that after this lecture, you may not want to consider taking a holiday to that part of the world. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful country. Home is home. We did not know what we had, how precious life was until 2016 when war came. So I'm going to be sharing these thoughts with you, and I must begin by thanking my brother Alex for inviting me. I've been to this house, and this is the second lecture I'm giving here, and it's always very nice to come. I am a doctoral student here at CUA, and I'm beginning my dissertation in the fall. And this paper is, in a way, it's when I sat down to write it that I saw how intimately related it is to my dissertation. So I'm doing a dissertation on Paul's ministry of reconciliation. I'm a New Testament student, and I'm doing that in studying the letters of Paul. My dissertation is the cultural context and Paul's ministry of reconciliation, situated in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 10 through chapter 6, verse 11. That's what I am going to be reflecting on and studying. So tonight, I share with you the Anglophone crisis inside Cameroon's lingering conflict. And I'm narrowing it down to what religious leadership can do, has done, as far as this conflict is concerned. So I'll begin with an introduction. The Anglophone crisis that continues to engulf Cameroon, and Cameroon is this geographical entity that is to the west of Nigeria, to the south of Chad, to the east of Central Africa, and we're to the north of Gabon, Central Africa, and Equatorial Guinea. So if you know any of these countries, you know where I come from and where our paper is situated. So this crisis, the Anglophone crisis, Anglophone because this Cameroon is the only bilingual country in Africa. Bilingual in the sense that people there speak English and they speak French, because of what I'm just about to explain to you. Our colonial heritage, France and Britain serving as our colonial masters. So this crisis continues to engulf Cameroon, and it is not a product of a recent political misstep of cultural misunderstanding. It is, in fact, the consequence of a long and painful history marked by broken promises, constitutional manipulation, and a systematic marginalization of a people. The roots of this conflict stretch back over a century and have deepened with time, evolving into a moral and political tragedy that has ruined national unity and has ruined the peace we enjoyed. Cameroon's colonial experience laid the foundation for its current divisions. Initially, a German colony from 1884, Cameroon's fate shifted after Germany's defeat in the First World War. In 1916, Britain and France divided the territory between themselves under a League of Nations mandate. This division, ratified by the 1919 Melnor-Simon Agreement, led to the creation of French Cameroon and British Cameroons. The British administered Cameroon, their territory. British administered territory was itself divided into northern and southern Cameroons, forming only about 1/5 of the original German Cameroon. Those regions were subjected to vastly different colonial experiences. French Cameroon developed under a centralized Jacobin administrative system with a strong unitary political culture. British Southern Cameroons, in contrast, was administered through indirect rule and evolved under a parliamentary system with democratic leanings, open political discourse, and a strong emphasis on the rule of law. These divergent colonial paths created not just two administrative regions, but two peoples with distinct political, legal, and cultural identities. In 1946, both French Cameroon and British Cameroons became United Nations Trust territories, administered respectively by France and Britain under international oversight. The expectation was clear. The territories were to be guided towards self-determination. In the late 1950s, with decolonization sweeping across Africa, the people of Southern Cameroons began to explore their options for governance. Three possibilities emerged. 1, independence as a separate nation. 2, integration with Nigeria. Or 3, reunification with French Cameroon. A majority of us leaned towards full independence. However, Britain, citing economic and political concerns, lobbied the United Nations to drop the independence option from the 1961 plebiscite. Southern Cameroonians were thus forced, and I mean my words, and they are well chosen, they are intentional. Southern Cameroonians were forced to choose between two unsatisfactory options: joining Nigeria or joining French Cameroon. On February 11th, 1961, Southern Cameroons voted to join French Cameroon, believing that this union would be based on equality and federalism. This was not a blind leap. Leaders and citizens were repeatedly assured that a federal arrangement would preserve their legal system, educational structure, and cultural identity. But those promises were betrayed almost immediately. At the Fumban Conference, this is a conference that took place in one of the cities of Cameroon. At the Fumban Conference in July 1961, representatives of French Cameroon and Southern Cameroons met to draft a federal constitution. However, the process was rushed, opaque, and largely dictated by French Cameroon. What I'm referring to here as Southern Cameroons is Anglophone Cameroon, is English Cameroon. Southern Cameroons, their legislative bodies never ratified the final constitution. And troublingly, the then president, Amadou Ahidjo, signed the constitution on September 1st before the union legally took effect on October 1st. These early constitutional manipulations set the tone for decades of centralized control, marginalization, and disenfranchisement of the Anglophone regions. In 1966, a single-party system was imposed And in 1968, Southern Cameroon's Prime Minister, Augustin Ngumjua, was illegally replaced with Solomon Tandeng Mona, who was simultaneously appointed Vice President of the Federal Republic, violating the principle of separation of powers. Then in 1972, President Amadou Ahidjo dissolved the federal structure through a controversial referendum. Without open debate or parliamentary procedure, a new unitary constitution was forced upon the nation, effectively erasing the autonomy of English Cameroon. The symbolic death knell came in 1984 when President Paul Biya, the second president, he came to power in 1982, and today he is still in power, a man at 92 years old. So, in 1984, when he came to power, he changed the country's name from the United Republic of Cameroon to the Republic of Cameroon, a name identical to that of French Cameroon before unification. Too many Anglophones that signed or that signaled that the union had been nothing more than a de facto annexation. They cried out. What had begun as a hopeful federation had quietly transformed into centralized domination. So, the mismanagement of the Anglophone problem, I've given you just a genesis of how these two people came together and what happened. That which was brought together in 1961, how it disintegrated. It generated a problem which is referred to as the Anglophone problem. But this is how it has been mismanaged. Rather than addressing these historical grievances, successive Cameroonian administrations have chosen a path of denial, silence, and division. For decades, the government has refused to recognize the Anglophone problem as a legitimate national concern. This denial, echoed even by some Anglophone elites, has worsened the crisis that began in 2016. This is very frustrating, fueling bitterness and driving a once moderate population towards frustration and, in some cases, radicalization. Anglophone political figures who chose loyalty to the central government were rewarded and are still being rewarded today with titles and positions, while those who speak out against injustices are sidelined and harassed. This divide and rule strategy created deep fractures within the Anglophone community, reducing its capacity for collective advocacy and shielding the government from serious reforms. When peaceful protests erupted in 2016, led by lawyers and teachers demanding respect for the Anglophone legal and educational systems, the government responded immediately with brute force. Lawyers were beaten in the streets in 2016. Teachers were tear-gassed. Internet access in the northwest and southwest regions that make up the English-speaking regions of Cameroon, internet was suspended for months. We lived without internet. Imagine you here living without it. Activists were arrested and tried in military tribunals. Rather than seeing these protests as an opportunity for dialogue, the government viewed them as threats to national unity and treated them as acts of rebellion. In this climate of denial and repression, separatist movements found fertile ground and they have been thriving. Organizations like what is called the Southern Cameroon's National Council, the SCNC, and the Amazonian Governing Council began advocating for independence in that part of the world, arguing that unity with French Cameroon had brought nothing but humiliation. These movements, especially after 2017, just 1 year after the crisis erupted, began organizing civil disobedience, great campaigns, issuing declarations of independence, and confronting the state with arms. It is essential to understand that these groups did not invent the Anglophone problem. They emerged from it. They are a reaction to broken promises. They are a reaction to broken promises, constitutional deceit, and institutional neglect. Many who support the idea of an independent English Cameroon are not extremists. They are ordinary people who feel that every other avenue for justice has been closed or has failed. Not all Anglophones support secession. Many still believe in a united Cameroon, provided that the union is based on mutual respect and genuine federalism. These federalists argue, and I'm one of them, they argue that returning to the 1961 arrangement or adapting it to a modern multi-state federation is the only sustainable path to peace. They believe that cultural and political autonomy must be restored and that Anglophones must have the right to govern themselves within their regions. However, the government has long resisted true federalism. The 1996 constitutional reform introduced the idea of decentralization. That was by the government, promising more local governance. But nearly 3 decades later, these reforms remain largely unfulfilled. Local councils lack power in Cameroon. Regional governors report directly to Yaoundé, to the president. They are not voted, they are appointed by the president. And the president continues to appoint almost all senior administrative positions. So the marginalization of Anglophones is not abstract. What I'm talking about here tonight is an experience that we live and that people live every day of their lives. It affects schools, courts, hospitals, and political institutions. Consider the following realities. And I say it affects courts. And here is a lawyer who recently just escaped from the thorns of what is going on in English Cameroon, as he would have been killed. In the sector of education, the national curricula are heavily biased towards the Francophone system. Examination boards are Francophone dominated, and Anglophone schools are often led by Francophone principals. Unfamiliar with the Anglo-Saxon model, none of the 5 ministries dealing with education was ever run by an Anglophone until recently, when in the midst of this crisis, one of those 5 ministries was given by an Anglophone. What is taught, the curriculum and everything in an Anglo-Saxon setup is dictated by people from some other culture. In politics, Anglophones are grossly underrepresented. Of the 36 ministries defending national budgets, only 1 is Anglophone. Key ministries such as finance, defense, and territorial administration were never ever governed or run by an Anglophone. It is, or it was in the course of this crisis, that an Anglophone who leaks the boots of the government was appointed to head the Ministry of Territorial Administration. The language used is a great problem. The government documents are frequently, in a bilingual country, published only in French. In Anglophone regions, Government officials conduct meetings in the French language, excluding many local citizens. In the judiciary, where my brother comes from, the imposition of French-trained judges in common law courts greatly undermined the legal culture of the Anglophone regions. And this was gently protested by the lawyers. Unfortunately for them, they were met with repression, with tear gas, and with killings. In administration, Francophones dominate almost all positions, from magistrates to divisional officers, even in Anglophone towns and villages. In economic policy, formerly thriving Anglophone institutions like the Cameroon Bank and the West Cameroon Marketing Board were dismantled by the French government. Oil from the Bakassi Peninsula, which is found in English Cameroon, in Anglophone Cameroon, and resources from Limbe, a great city in English Cameroon, these benefit the national budget, but rarely return to the regions that produce them. In culture, a subtle but sustained campaign has been waged to erase Anglophone identity. The English language is sidelined, and Anglophone customs, values, and systems are portrayed as inferior or unpatriotic. So there is a resistance and a cry for justice. The rise in protests, political agitation, and even armed resistance in Anglophone Cameroon must be understood as the natural reaction of a people denied justice. The late John Gu Foncha, one of the architects of reunification, publicly denounced the union before his death, stating that Anglophones had been treated as second-class citizens. The formation of the Social Democratic Front, the SDF, a major or main political party, opposition party in Cameroon, formed in 1990 in Bamenda, marked another significant milestone in Anglophone resistance as it demanded multi-party democracy or equal representation in what looked like a one-party system. The All Anglophone Conference of the 1990s called for meaningful dialogue and constitutional reforms. Their resolutions were ignored by the government. Instead of listening, the government branded critics as enemies of the state. Many were imprisoned. The seed of what we harvest today in Cameroon, the seed of insurgency and a war that today is raging for 9 years, these seeds were planted in the soil of silence, in the soil of repression. It is intellectually dishonest, my dear friends, and empirically a mortal sin to claim that there is no Anglophone problem, as some even today will say, even after 9 years of a protracted war. International bodies such as the United Nations, the African Union, the Commonwealth, and the European Union have all called on the Cameroon government to engage in meaningful dialogue. Even the former French president, Jacques Chirac, once acknowledged the special nature of the Anglophone issue. Till date, practically nothing is happening. The solution does not lie in military suppression as we have it there, or cosmetic reforms. It lies in truth, in justice, and in reconciliation. Tonight, I reiterate that the solution lies in truth, in justice, and reconciliation. The government must acknowledge the historical and institutional roots of the problem. It must listen not just to elites, who a good many of them are members of the government, but it must listen to teachers, to lawyers, to farmers and students. The government has refused to listen to them. It must engage in an honest, inclusive national conversation about the future of the union. And this is my dream as I set up to write a dissertation on reconciliation. Now, with you, how the crisis has unfolded since 2016. The initial phase was in September of 2016. It was triggered, as I've said, by peaceful strikes orchestrated by lawyers and teachers in the Anglophone regions, protesting the imposition of French-speaking judges and teachers. The crisis was initially non-violent. These teachers and lawyers went to the streets with peace plans, holding peace plans, with slogans calling for the government to respond to their cries very peacefully. As we have said, they were met with tear gas, with deaths, and with imprisonment. The government's heavy-handed response of arrests, military deployment, and internet shutdown fueled resentment. The emergence of armed groups are everywhere now in English Cameroon. What maybe in Latin America and Central America we call gangs. By the late 2017, Anglophone separatist groups, frustrated by the silence or repression of the government, came up, such as the Ambazonian Defense Force, ADF, the Southern Cameroon's Defense Forces, SOCADEF. They declared the independent state of Ambazonia. That is how English Cameroon is referred to. It's Anglophone Cameroon, it's English Cameroon, or Ambazonia. Armed conflict began in 2017 in earnest, resulting in a full-blown civil war in 2018. It was war till date. Humanitarian fallout. According to the Humanitarian Crisis Group and Human Rights Watch, the conflict has led to over 6,000 people dead in English Cameroon, 800,000 internally displaced persons, IDPs, and over 85,000 refugees living now in Nigeria. Schools were shut down, and in some places have remained shut down, and children cannot go to school, and some have not gone to school since 2008. Civilians have been brutalized, and entire villages have been burnt down and razed down to nothing. Now, one of the great concerns of tonight, one of those great concerns is the role of the church, the role of religious authorities. Religious institutions as moral voices and mediators, and this is how we have seen them. First, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has been a great voice in this crisis, particularly through the Bamenda Provincial Episcopal Conference, BAPEC, and the National Episcopal Conference of Cameroon, NEC. The bishops and the bishops' conferences have consistently advocated for peace, dialogue, and justice. The 2016 memorandum of the bishops of the Bamenda Ecclesiastical Province to the head of state, that document remains a reference point that anyone interested in the resolution of this war and the conflict in Cameroon should read. It points out how the history of the country has been manipulated, and it spells out what can be done to resolve it. The president and the government ignored that document. The Presbyterian and Baptist churches, these churches in Cameroon have also made strong statements calling for inclusive dialogue and condemning human rights violations. The former moderator of the Presbyterian Church, Dr. Funky Samuel, urged ceasefires and denounced attacks on civilians on many occasions. And he worked very closely with the Catholic Church. Muslim leaders, while more reserved in political statements, Islamic authorities in the Anglophone regions have provided humanitarian relief and promoted intercommunal peace. But we keep on wondering why the Muslim leaders seem to be very slow in this venture. There have been concrete actions made by religious groups, especially in the Catholic Church. Pastoral letters and numerous pastoral letters have been issued calling for ceasefires, inclusive dialogue, and the end of violence. These letters are widely circulated and discussed among the faithful, in the media, and everywhere. The sacredness of human life has been emphasized by the bishops and the priests, and the immorality of extrajudicial killings and torture is preached every day. The legitimacy of Anglophone grievances, while condemning both state repression and excesses by separatist fighters, have been condemned by the church. The need for justice, truth, and reconciliation, and a rethinking of Cameroon's political structure, including federalism and decentralization with real autonomy, have been discussed by church leaders, and the government is giving a deaf ear to these. Some bishops, especially those in English Cameroon, have been outspoken and consistent in advocating for a peaceful resolution that is often, what do they think, a solution to this? Humanitarian aid, churches and faith-based non-governmental organizations like Caritas Cameroon, Justice and Peace Commission of the Catholic Church, and the Presbyterian Relief Services have provided critical support, food, shelter, trauma healing, and educational facilities for displaced children and families. There have been mediation initiatives. In 2020, the then cardinal in Cameroon, the late Christian Cardinal Toumi, attempted to launch the Anglophone General Conference as a neutral religious-led peace initiative. Despite heavy obstruction by the government, and we know precisely why the government obstructed this venture, the initiative, despite the obstruction, represented a significant attempt to build a faith-based dialogue platform. Unfortunately, it didn't take off. The Catholic Church, through its bishops and clergy, has continued to mediate between the government and Anglophone civil society leaders. Very often, there is a party that is very open to listen, and another that is closed to discussions. However, the regime, for some reasons, has largely ignored these initiatives or co-opted alternative voices, urged the non-violence protesters, and called for protection of human rights by security forces. The church is doing that. The church has provided safe havens, pastoral care, and humanitarian assistance to displaced persons, victims of violence, and political detainees. The church has continued to insist that the solution lies in inclusive and genuine dialogue, not in repression or military solutions. Local and global advocacy. The Catholic Church has also used its global networks to bring attention to the crisis. The Church's Justice and Peace, and I will reiterate this, the Caritas, these are all affiliated media, and they have documented abuses from day one of this crisis and given voice to the voiceless. And so the bishops have engaged the Holy See, diplomatic missions, and international human rights organizations to highlight the gravity of the conflict. And the Diocese of Kumbu, where I come from, the Diocese of Mamfe, the Diocese of Boya, and the Archdiocese of Bamenda, these have been victims of threats, yet they continue to stand as moral authorities and voices for peace. The church is facing great limitations and challenges as religious authorities mediating for peace. There have been accusations of bias. Some political actors have accused the church, particularly the Catholic clergy, of supporting the separatists, wanting to separate the state. And this is a charge that is often without evidence, but used to intimidate. Security threats where several religious leaders have been targeted by both sides. Priests, pastors, and imams have been kidnapped, beaten, and even killed. In November of 2018, Father Thomas Omborto was killed in Kembong Parish in Mamfe. On the 4th of October 2018, in Bamising, a 19-year-old seminarian, Gerald Ajingwe, was killed brutally by the state military. On the 20th of July in 2018, in Moyoka, in the Diocese of Boya, Father Alexander Ngubi Sop was brutally assassinated. Reverend Isaac Ato, a Ghanaian who was a pastor in English Cameroon in Batibo, was killed on the 14th of July 2018. And in that 2018, I just limited it to 2018. In 2018, in October, the American pastor Charles Truman was assassinated in Bamenda in the Northwest region. These have brought fear, and these have left great populations just bewildered and not knowing what to do. A good many have been kidnapped. I remember Father Anthony Viban, Brother Collins, Father Nkwine, Monsignor George Nkwo, my bishop, kidnapped on 2 occasions. Myself kidnapped and stayed with them for 6 days. Patrick Atang besides me for 6 days, and many others. The 2016 memorandum of the bishops was prophetic and courageous. And if I talk to you tonight, I'm talking on the strength of that document. It diagnosed the root causes of what I've shared with you, the Anglophone crisis, and offered a path towards dialogue and justice. However, the government has failed to engage constructively with the memorandum and the broader religious voices that continue to cry out. Religious institutions continue to be vital players in both moral discourse and humanitarian relief. If we have this conversation tonight, the aim is that you understand that it is not only in Ukraine, that it is not only in Hamas, in Israel, in Iran, where the guns are loud, where children and women and families are distressed. There are places in the world, like in the Congo, like in northern Nigeria, and what we talk about in English Cameroon. There are places where people are just wanting to have a space. People are just wanting to go to church and pray. On Pentecost Day of 2020, it was a bad Pentecost in the Diocese of Mamfe, where over 54 were killed in the Catholic Church, just gathered to pray. And it continues to happen. So the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon is not merely a political rebellion, it is a profound identity crisis fueled by historical injustice and cultural alienation. And the bishops of that country, through their landmark memorandum, through their everyday efforts, being kidnapped, working with priests to reach out the displaced in the country and out of the country, they are setting the moral tone for engagement. Unfortunately, the other end is continuing to be deaf to all these voices. And time has come for the Cameroonian government to listen with humility. The religious authorities should speak with one voice and continue to speak with one voice. And the international community, and you are that international community, is called upon to support through prayers, through dialogue, and by every other means that the international community can use to let the world know and to let the government of Cameroon effect peace. Thank you.